Hello and welcome to the MBOM podcast, where you'll learn to master the business of yoga. MBOM is a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Amanda Kingsmith. I'm a 500-hour registered yoga teacher, a yoga business coach, and a total business geek. Here at MBOM, you'll learn everything you need to know to create a sustainable yoga business by learning from myself and guests from around the world about how they built their yoga businesses, and about how you too can become a successful yoga teacher, studio owner, and much more. All right, let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of the MBOM podcast. This podcast is brought to you in partnership with OfferingTree. OfferingTree has set out to make digital marketing fun, easy, and affordable. They are your one-stop shop for a website, scheduling software, payment, email newsletter, and more. Stay tuned to hear more about them later in this episode. And now for this week's episode of the podcast, I am super excited to be joined by Peter Sterios. Peter is the founder of Manduka. He is a pioneer of the modern yoga movement and one of the most popular yoga teachers/trainers in the US for the last 4 decades. And on this episode of the podcast, we are talking about what it was like to create and found Manduka, what it was like to step away from that business, how his teaching has evolved over the last 4 decades, as well as what it's been like to write his newest book, which is Gravity and Grace: How to Awaken Your Subtle Body and the Healing Power of Yoga. So Peter has a ton of experience, a ton of knowledge to share, and we cover a lot of different things on this episode of the show. One thing I would love for you to note is that Peter and I actually recorded this back earlier in 2020, before the pandemic hit, before COVID-19 was over on this side of the world, impacting us so heavily. So if you hear anything that sounds a little bit weird in terms of where we are at now, please just know that that's because we recorded many months ago. All right, without further ado, here's Peter. Welcome to the show today, Peter. I'm really excited to have you here with me.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited to dive into this conversation. And the first thing I'm curious about is, where are you joining me from today?
San Luis Obispo, California.
Amazing. And can you tell me a little bit about your background, your yoga story, what first got you interested in yoga?
Sure. I came from a very traditional middle-class family. Yoga was probably the furthest thing from my mind when it kind of dropped in my lap. And the curiosity, I was at university here in San Luis Obispo in architecture school, and was literally just walking by through the rec center, walking by a door that was partially ajar. And for whatever reason, I poked my head in. It was just the weirdest thing. And of course, it was opened the door into this. This is in now the late 70s. It poked my head into this room full of women doing yoga with no context for what they were, and just in this naive, in a way, kind of rude way, I said, "What are you guys doing?" Right in the middle of class. So the teacher was so polite and said, "It's yoga." And I said, "What's that?" And she said, it's type of exercise. You want to try it?" And in the shock of being called to try it right then in that moment, I was stunned. And yet, something inside me said, "Sure, when's the next class?" And she said, "Come back next week." So I came back that next week, and that first class was, like many people have in their first experience of yoga, it was life-changing. It was challenging. It was a workout. It was hard. And yet at the end of the class, it was powerful. And I felt the effects immediately. And it wasn't like I committed to like full on practice of yoga, but I found myself going more and more to that class. And when I left college, graduated from college, things just lined up for me to continue practicing yoga.
Wow, that's amazing. And I love just thinking about, like, as a teacher, it's so funny to think about somebody poking their head in and being like, "Hello, what are you doing?"
Exactly.
You're like, we're being zen right now. Could you not talk?
Yeah. And what's amazing to me in that moment, and I don't even remember who the teacher was, what was amazing at the moment was how calm she was about this rude interruption to, right in the middle of her class. And I'm so grateful for her. And I one day, hopefully, maybe connect paths with her again. Who knows?
Yeah, I love that. And so at what point did you decide, like, hey, I want to become a yoga teacher?
That actually wasn't a decision I made. And I'll tell you how this happened. I graduated from college and I went to the East Coast for a job, and I met someone that introduced me to a place called Santa Fe, New Mexico. And after this job on the East Coast, I found myself traveling to Santa Fe just to visit. And Santa Fe was this magical place that I had no idea even existed before I went. And I decided to stay there. And so I interviewed for a job. And this job, one of the requirements for the job was that I had to try out for the local Santa Fe rugby team, because the boss where I was getting a job as an architect was the captain of the team. Now, this is such a weird story, because that requirement for the job, I said, sure, I was an athlete. So I said, yeah, I'll try it. And the team that I played for won a national championship and got invited to New Zealand. I go to New Zealand, and in New Zealand, I meet this teacher that I end up studying with actually for 20 years. After 8 years in New Zealand, it's time to go home. And my teacher says, why don't you go to India? I think you'd enjoy studying with the teacher I studied with. And I said, yeah, I don't have any big plans. I'll do that. And I set aside a year of my life to study in India. Near the end of that year, the school secretary at this Institute of Yoga asked me if I would do him a favor. And I said, and he cut me a lot of slack when I arrived in India. He gave me opportunities that I really appreciated. And so I felt like I'd like to return the favor. And I would do anything for him. And he asked me, I have a friend who's got a health condition, and he's too afraid to come to this institute because of the main teacher's reputation. And I would like you to go teach him a private yoga class. And that was probably the only thing that he could have asked me that I wasn't prepared to do. And so I said, listen, I'm not a teacher. Even though I've been here a year, I'm just here studying and trying to learn. And he said, no, you are a teacher. And what you have to do is just be authentic and go into that situation and share with this friend of mine what you know. So sure enough, I agreed. And literally the next day, I'm at my little apartment in Pune, India, and this limousine, old Bentley white limousine, shows up, and the driver doesn't speak a word of English. I get in the car. I go out in the country with this guy, and we pull up to this literally gated compound with military guards and things. And I'm thinking, wow, where am I going? And it was a officer in one of the military forces of India who had, high blood pressure, heart disease. And we instantly connected. And for the remaining month, or like a month and a half that I had left at the institute, I gave him weekly yoga classes. And it was a powerful learning experience for me. And I thought that was the first moment that I thought, well, maybe this is something that I can do. And when I got back to California, I came back to San Luis Obispo. And even though yoga was ramping up in the States, this is now the kind of early 90s, there was no yoga studio in San Luis Obispo. So I started teaching one class, and then that one class grew to 3 classes. And the next thing you know, we're looking for a space, and we opened the first yoga center here, 20 some odd years ago. So that's kind of in the back door, so to speak. I never did a teacher training other than just going to India for a year and learning. And
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's so interesting to think about, I guess, just the world of yoga now and the world of yoga then. And, you know, I feel like going to India for a year and studying and learning and really being immersed is certainly, enough time to be able to say, hey, I can teach this now. In fact, it's more than the average yoga teacher would probably learn in an average 200-hour training. But I'm kind of curious, just from like your experience of coming into being a yoga teacher that way and what you see now in the yoga world. Can you just kind of touch on that a little bit?
Sure. Sure. I think this industry of yoga teaching at the moment is going through some growing pains, let's call it, because I I feel like students, and I'll look at my teacher trainings, for example. I would say over the last 10 to 15 years of teaching teacher trainings, that I would say as many as 80% of those people who are coming never teach. And I was curious about that. And during the writing of my book, I did some research into it. And I think what I see is students are looking for more what they get in the average weekly yoga class. And there's really no place, other than maybe going to India, there's really no place easy to concentrate, study, and get something beyond what's offered in a traditional or a modern yoga class. So the teacher training commodity, let's call it, is their only choice, and especially the 200-hour trainings. It's where students who are interested in learning more about the intricacies of yoga, that's really their only choice. So what's the challenge right now is because of the explosive growth of yoga in general, there's a high demand for teachers. And of course, these 200-hour teachers that are recently graduated, they have some basic tools, but they lack some of the just life experience that is so necessary for being a competent yoga teacher. And yes, there's this fitness, physical element of hatha yoga that many graduates are capable of teaching, but yoga is so much more than that. So that's the biggest difference that I see right now, is that a lot of what's being taught as yoga is, in a way, it's a doorway into a bigger world. But once you pass in and through that doorway, the choices are, a little bit limited. And where do we go from here? That's also a good question. So I don't necessarily have a great answer for that.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. I definitely, hear what you're saying, and I think that you tackled that wonderfully. So thank you for answering that, because it's definitely, I mean, it's tough. It's like, the world of yoga is changing, especially in the West, and I know there's lots of conversation happening right now about, how to deal with all of that. And I don't know that there's like one correct answer, but there's definitely, it's great to hear from somebody who's been in the industry for so long. And so, one of the things that I'm curious about, just learning more about you and reading your bio and all that stuff, you've done so much since you started in this industry. And I'm curious if you can kind of walk me through your career. So, you started teaching while you're over in India, you came home, you opened a center. And then, what kind of happened next? Like, when did Manduka become a thing? When did you launch your DVD? All that good stuff.
Wow, Amanda, this is, I mean, we'll give you the condensed version, because that whole story would take for hours.
I
But
know it's your life's work, really.
in a nutshell, so I came back. The reason that I was able to return to San Luis Obispo, because it's a small town and jobs are pretty thin. I got a job as an architect, which is what I graduated college from, and that was kind of my bread and butter, let's call it, to be able to then start a yoga studio. So literally right across the street from where my architecture office was this building that we ended up renting and building it was literally a community center. And it was very convenient for me. I lived 3 blocks from where my architecture office was. My yoga studio was across the street, and things were going well, except I was working about 60-hour weeks as, kind of a regular thing. And that's not sustainable. And yet in the midst of all that, then Manduka starts. And so now, how did that happen? Literally, my teacher of 20 years, who started coming to the States to teach, he was from Australia. He showed up one year with this thick black mat, and I'm going, what is that? And he said, this is a mat, a new yoga mat. And I said, where'd you get it? And he said, in Germany. And I said, how do I get one? And he says, here's a phone number. Call my friend Klaus. So I call Klaus in Germany from California, and I say, hey, Klaus, how can I get one of these mats? And he said, no problem. I'm happy to sell to you. First order, $25,000. Like he wasn't going to just sell me one mat. He wanted to start something in the US. And so I considered it for a day, and then I got back to him and I said, okay, I'm in. So now I've got kind of 3 businesses to manage. And, that kind of scenario lasted for about 10 years. And I learned a lot, and I saw a lot. And ultimately, that unsustainability of a lifestyle like that caught up with me, and I got some serious diagnosis, and my health, and those light bulb moments come up just in the nick of time sometimes. And for me, that's what it was. It was like, okay, what's got to give here? And that's when my life started to change. And it wasn't easy. And I talk about this a little bit in the book. Some of those journeys after that moment were painful, and it took me, into the depths of, I guess you might say, despair, feeling this loss of. Loss of direction. And what I was blessed with and graced with, in a way, was just enough understanding to, instead of trying to fix it, is to just kind of ride it and see where life's circumstances took me. And I really initially wasn't doing it consciously. It was more out of just lack of any creativity, how to solve the problems that I was experiencing. And then I started to see a pattern in it, and I started to trust it. And it really is something, as we go through life, to just trust the process and be as present as you can in whatever you're going through, with an open mind. And in a way, this presence, in a way that you feel intimately everything you're going through and see how it changes. And that was a powerful thing for me. And if I just go back into some of the study that I've done in yoga, it's this non-attachment thing. It's like, as we experience some of these things, the very nature of things is change. Nothing is statically constant. So how much patience do we have to watch and see how it changes, and how do we respond as it changes without giving up in a creative way?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's really interesting. As you're talking, I was thinking about how, as yoga teachers and just as humans in general, a lot of the time, we have these great ambitions and we build these businesses. And I mean, you had 3 businesses going on, which is absolutely insane, but big successful businesses, and you're managing all of this, and then your body just turns around and says no. we're not doing this anymore. And it's
Exactly.
interesting how our practice of yoga becomes like such an important part in the business side of things, because we have to listen to what our bodies say. But then there's also this, like, I don't want to abandon this like thing that I grew, like this business that I've been working on, which is, I feel like that's like one of probably the hardest things in life.
Well, what's interesting, if I take Manduka as an example, so I stepped away and I sold most of my shares in that company. And um, 15 years later, I get a phone call from the new owners. It's changed hands about 3 or 4 times. And the new owners say, we need you back. Would you come back? So it's really, for me, it's this full circle. I'm back working for the company in 2 roles. One is a kind of global ambassador, and it really is a special company, and it's gone through its ups and downs, but the current management team is really connected to the legacy of this company and the culture that the first company created. And that's such a satisfying feeling for me, that there's still value in what we started there. And the other role is I'm, helping their product development team. And one of the projects we're working on is a post petrochemical yoga mat. And that's a big job. And it's been frustrating a little bit at the moment, because it's costs money to do that kind of research, and it's not a linear process. It's kind of one step forward, 2 steps back sometimes. But we're committed to it and we're doing it, and we have had some wonderful breakthroughs. So I'm hopeful that that's going to produce something in the next year or so.
Yeah. Yeah. What is a post petrol yoga mat? Like, what does that mean?
At the moment, the polymers that are used to create yoga mats, even so-called natural rubber yoga mats, all have fillers and chemicals in them that are petrochemical, some kind of carbon petrochemical material that's either toxic in terms of the standards that are set for certain products, or even though they're advertised as biodegradable, there is no such thing as 100% biodegradable mat. And what I feel is important, especially with global warming, is that we eliminate this carbon intensive material out of the manufacture of yoga mats. And so that's the goal. And there are other companies, in other industries that are, doing the same research. It just seems to be lacking in the yoga sphere. So I think that Manduka's legacy is one that has this environmental commitment, and we're working to, have another part of our legacy be a truly non-petrochemical yoga mat.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. Thanks for sharing that. And I feel like that's an incredible initiative. It's interesting. I actually have my husband and I both have the Manduka Ecolite travel mats, just because we
Yeah.
travel a lot. And I mean, as you know, yoga mats can get so heavy. It's like one of those things where it can weigh more than your carry-on sometimes. And we love those mats. So I can actually see it right now from where we're talking, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I love the initiatives that, the company's continuing to do. And one of the things that I'm curious about from what you've been talking about is, when you're working on a project or with a company and you've got a bunch of other stuff on the go, how do you decide like when to step away and when to take on new projects? Like, what does that kind of look like for you?
I'm just it's I don't really have a process. I have trusted when my intuition, when projects come up, I just sit with myself for a while and ask, is this how I want to commit my energy moving forward? And I have had amazing success with not too much overlap with projects. I mean, right now is a perfect example. And I can't say that I'm, an expert at it, but I'm still actively an architect working on various projects, two just completed and one just about to start, a large yoga studio in Los Angeles, the interior design of it. I'm still, I'm now an author with writing this book for Sounds True and out on the road. I'm teaching a regular weekly yoga class here in San Luis Obispo, but I've had to cut back a little bit on that. And then I've got this job with Manduka, which isn't full time. It's kind of part time. And so far, knock on wood, everything is a nice balance. Although, as like sometimes emails slide under the radar, get in a crack somewhere. But I usually find them and respond to them. And yeah, it's just. What I find my life, if I look back and reflect on life, my life has been this string of coincidences that all I had to do really is show up and be present with this situation and be aware of what was unfolding and then respond intuitively. I'm not a big intention setter. As a matter of fact, I more, if I do anything, I just maybe am in a state of meditation or prayer, and I just open to possibility in a way, and then wait and see how it plays out.
That's amazing. I think that that's a really, beautiful practice. And I love how you're talking about, kind of the intuition and trusting your gut. And I feel like sometimes there's just things that we can't plan for. I mean, illness is definitely one of those. But then on the other side of that, opportunities can slide into your email at any point. And I love the idea of sitting in, our practices, meditation, prayer. I really love journaling. So that's one for me that's super helpful with making big decisions and just kind of trusting if it's the right time and the right opportunity and all that sort of thing.
I have a little quick story, if you've got time for it, about emails sliding in, kind of crazy circumstances or crazy coincidences. So I got an email from Sounds True just out of the blue, and I almost deleted it. It was in my spam folder, and because I was on their newsletter list, I just thought it was a newsletter. And I don't know about you, but I get so many newsletters now, I don't even have the time to open them, let alone delete them sometimes, So anyway, I'm about to delete this email from Sounds True, thinking it was a newsletter, but in the subject box, it said Gravity and Grace, which is the name of my DVDs. And it was like, wait, Sounds True is using my, my little trademark name for my DVDs. What's going on? So I open up the email, and it's this acquisitions editor at Sounds True writing me a personal email saying, hey, we saw the title of your workshop at Esalen in Big Sur. Would you be interested in writing a book about that title? And it was like, wow, and so I, was excited, and I showed my wife. I said, look at this, and I'd written 1,500 word articles, but this is like a 65,000 word book that they were asking me to write. And I didn't feel like I had that ability. And so I emailed them back and I said, yes, I'd love to. Let's talk more. Well, what I didn't know, that email had been in my spam folder for 3 months. What I didn't know is at the time was if you answer an email that's been tagged spam, when you send the reply in some servers, it's also identified as spam. So my reply went in this editor at Sounds True's spam folder for another month. And so, I never heard back from him. And I thought, I was a little depressed, and I was literally teaching in Iceland, and my wife one day asked me, what's wrong with you? And I said, oh, I'm a little sad. And she goes, why? And I said, oh, Sounds True never responded to me. I guess they found someone else. It was the woe is me little self-pity thing. And she said, well, did you think about writing them back? And I said, no, they probably get, authors trying to pitch books all the time, blah, blah, blah. She said, no, write them back. So I wrote them back, started a new email, wrote them back. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. So that was one of those amazing coincidences for me that manifested itself into something really magical. The book for me was a process that really uncovered a lot of gaps, let's say, in my understanding of yoga, because I was forced to put it into words. And that research that came about, it has, in a way, manifested in a book that really brings together 45 years of doing yoga for me, and in a contemporary way.
Yeah, wow, that's an incredible story. I'm glad that you did share that. And it's a reminder to not dismiss things in our spam. And
Totally.
it's also crazy. It's crazy how, email works and that it went back into spam. And I'm glad your wife encouraged you to write again. So that, I feel like that's another reminder. Like if there's somebody that you want to get in contact with and you haven't heard from them, just send another email.
That same thing just happened this morning. Yeah, I got up early, and I was, I don't know if I checked your emails yesterday. I was looking for an email from you, and turns out it's a text message from a guy I had written an email to a month and a half ago, who is one of the curators for TEDx, and I wanted to see if they would be open to having me host a talk. And here, out of the blue, is this text like, "Hey, I got your email, and I see that you're going to be in Sedona this weekend. Let's talk." So I had written that off, like, you don't hear back for a month from someone, and then there it is. So I think it's powerful if we just, in a way, let things be as they are and respond in the moment when something changes.
Yeah, absolutely. That's amazing. Hey everyone, we're just taking a quick break from the show to talk about OfferingTree. If you're looking to get your yoga classes online in a hurry, I recommend checking out OfferingTree. They make it easy to schedule and take payments for online classes with Zoom, Skype, YouTube, and other video conferencing tools. OfferingTree set out to make creating your digital presence fun, easy, and affordable. With one account, you can create a website in minutes with email marketing tools to collect email addresses, allowing you to send newsletters and automated emails to your subscribers. It all works seamlessly together with one account and one subscription. Forget spending all your time and energy just trying to remember what each account does and what your login information is. On top of that, OfferingTree has an embedded scheduling feature, so if you already have a website that you love, you can use it for online payments and scheduling. To learn more about what OfferingTree can do for your digital presence, visit offeringtree.com/MBM. OfferingTree has been supporting MBM for over a year now, and I not only love the product, but I also love the people. OfferingTree is providing special pricing for MBM listeners, so be sure to visit offeringtree.com/MBM. That's offeringtree.com/MBOM to receive the discount. All right, now back to the episode. And before you ever heard from the company, had you considered writing a book? Like, was that something that was on your mind?
I had a period in my life that had a lot of loss, let's call it. And at the time, I was recently divorced and having trouble sleeping. And so I would be up in the middle of the night with kind of nothing except that emptiness in my mind to deal with. And I said, well, if I'm either going to be depressed or I'm going to get up and do a yoga, practice. And so I started practicing, and literally I'd practiced for 6 hours through the night. And during that time, I uncovered things in my practice that I had just kept a little journal beside me, and I would write these little cryptic notes down as these insights would kind of drop in from who knows where. And so I had, over 2 years, I had this 5 journals filled with these kind of cryptic notes. That was, when I actually had that email from Sounds True, I went back and I looked at these notes, and it was going to be a big job to, first of all, read some of my handwriting, and then second of all, try to organize it. But that's how, that was the seed of the book, is those journals. And I have had a very unusual yogic path. In addition to studying very traditional Iyengar yoga, which I was in India for and studied with my teacher of 20 years. I also, while I was in India right before I left, did a 10-day Vipassana course. And that Vipassana course had as a profound effect on my understanding of yoga as, the year living in India. And for me, that's what shifted for me. I started to see that what I had thought was yoga up to that meditation retreat was just, in a way, preliminary exercises for this deeper work, which has to do with the inseparable nature of our mind and our body. Like, I think up to that point, before Vipassana, I thought I had an understanding of how my body influenced my mind, but I don't think I had a great grasp of how my mind influences my body. And that Vipassana course helped me bridge that gap. And it's informed what my book is about in a big way, in an equal way to what my physical practice of yoga has been.
Yeah. Wow. That's incredible. And I feel like for a lot of people, writing a book is something that's maybe on their goals or something that they feel like they might want to do, maybe even a bucket list item, you might say. And I think for a lot of people, there's like a lot of things that maybe hold them back, the fear of actually putting something out there. I mean, the actual time of writing. I'm curious what the process of like putting your whole book together was like. And I know you've touched on it a little bit, but I'd love to hear like what that writing process was like, especially with a busy schedule. Like, I mean, life doesn't stop for you to write a book, I would imagine.
Man, I'm just cracking up because writing a book was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And it took my relationship with my wife to the edge. It took my relationship with my daughter to the edge. It tested my friendships with a lot of people because of my, like I would be at an event or in a gathering of people, and my body was there, but my mind wasn't there. And people, after the fact would come back to me and, share with me, you've been gone for the last 3.5 years. It was a 3.5 year process. And the chaos of busyness didn't help. And at the end of the first year of writing was a big shift where we sold our studio here in San Luis Obispo, our yoga studio, because of a redevelopment in our area. And we took it as an opportunity to travel for 6 months with our daughter, take her out of school and homeschool her on the road. And so we spent a month in Nicaragua and a month in Brazil and a month in Argentina. And then we spent almost 4 months in New Zealand. And until we got to New Zealand, though, I was trying to write, and I had a suitcase full of books and my laptop. But we were staying in these, a lot of them were Airbnbs or places that just had one room and a bathroom. And I made a promise to my family that I would only write at night. Well, at night I was exhausted because we'd usually be doing something fun during the day. So I'm a morning person, so I'd get up most mornings around 3:30. And the only room in these places where we were staying that had a door for privacy and sound was the bathroom. So I'd set my laptop up on the toilet seat and sit on the floor with a cushion. So I'd say half of my book was written in the bathroom with my laptop on a toilet seat. So you can imagine how bad the ergonomics of that was.
Yeah.
And at the end of writing, I had the worst carpal tunnel in my hands because I'm not a fast typer. And I also broke probably every rule of book writing in that I didn't write, an hour. Like most seminars you go to say, write at least an hour every day to keep the juices flowing, blah, blah, blah. Well, unfortunately for me, it was more like I would write 7 days, like 4 to 5 hours a day, and then not write for a week or two. And so this process was what was painful for me. Like in those periods of time when I wasn't writing, it wasn't that I wasn't thinking about the book. And that was also hard, because then I'd be up late at night sometimes, not able to sleep because my mind was busy. And so that's the kind of process I went through. And in the end, Sounds True was so gracious. They gave me 2 extensions on my deadlines. And then when I turned the book in, they let me work with an editor that was someone they hired out of office, kind of like a editing consultant. And we worked another 8 months to create what the finished product is. And that collaboration with this amazing editor who lived in Portland, I've never actually met her. We've communicated a couple times by phone, but the rest of the time it's all been through emails. Just really changed the flavor of my book. And I feel like it's a very accessible book with very relatable stories, with very relatable language, which I'm really pleased with.
Yeah. Wow. That sounds like quite the journey. I just had a perfect image of like, I've stayed in a ton of Airbnbs as a traveler myself, and just, totally imagining the lack of ergonomics with that type of setup. And I feel like it's tough. It's tough in those situations for many reasons. But one of the things that I think is hard about any type of creative endeavor is, the creative juices hit you when they hit you. And it's really hard when you're not like in the moment of being able to just like dive right into that, right? Like maybe it's because you're working, maybe it's because you're with your family adventuring, and you're like, you can't just be like, hey, wife and daughter, like, see you later, I got to go do this. But then it's hard when you do have that time and maybe it's not flowing as much, and there's just
That's
a lot of
exactly
things.
the challenge. And
Mm-hmm.
it sounds like you have that creative bug in you as well. It's a juggling act. And I don't think I have another book in me, to be honest. But who knows? Life may have other ideas.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it'll be like, I haven't had kids yet myself, but I've heard that sometimes right after you have a child, you're like kind of traumatized and you're like, I'm never having another one. One is enough. And then, 2 years down the road, you're like, okay, I kind of want another one. So maybe
Yeah.
that'll be the book writing experience for you. Who knows?
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, one of the things I always love to touch on in the podcast, since it is more focused towards the business side of things, is what are some of the biggest business lessons you've learned throughout your career?
This is a great question. Literally everything that supported my success in business, I learned on a yoga mat. And being on a yoga mat is about showing up regularly, being fully present in the moment. And that particular lesson was something that I seemed to be really good at in business, that I could, one of the things that I lived by when Manduka started to grow, because it was a one-man company for the first year and a half, and I hired this 14-year-old boy who lived across the street to be my warehouse guy. The warehouse was my garage at my house here in San Luis Obispo. And he would come over after school and fulfill all the orders that I got. And that was us. That was Manduka for the first year and a half. But I feel like I was this kind of thing that I lived by was always hire people that are smarter than you. And sometimes the smart wasn't necessarily analytical smartness as much as it was emotional intelligence. And I was just blessed in those early years with really good-hearted people and clear communicators, and at points in their lives where they could go above and beyond an hourly employee. And literally, probably for the first 5 or 6 years of Manduka, we were a 4-person company. And we had this just exponential growth in those years. and we all knew each other's jobs. If someone was sick or someone was out of town, the other three would cover. And the busier I got, the less involved I was. And my office manager was just incredibly gifted in dealing like human resources people, but she was also our sales rep. So she was good with customers. And the legacy, let's say, of Manduka is that we've always had that kind of family feel to the business where people could reach us on the phone. And it's changed a little bit on the phone, but I think for the first 10 years, when you called Manduka, you got a live person picking up the phone. And that was something we were quite proud of. And we got great feedback. I call your competitors and all we get is an answering machine or some kind of voicemail system. And, inevitably those kinds of things fall away. But I think the culture of Manduka is still intact. And that's been really refreshing for me to see when I go down to Los Angeles for meetings and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like that would be really cool to see, especially, knowing where it came from. And it's incredible that it started out as, a distribution center, if you want to call it that, in your garage with somebody else helping out. I think that those stories are so amazing because I think that sometimes, as a little guy, we can look at these bigger companies like Manduka and think, wow, they're so successful and they've always been that way. And I think it's remembering that everyone starts as a beginner, everyone starts from the beginning. Everyone starts as a little guy at one point. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, I never imagined that my personal legacy would be that I became this seller of rubber yoga mats on the internet. Like that was just not in the business plan when I graduated from architecture school. And yet somehow being at the right place at the right time and responding in that moment to the opportunity that presented itself. And then, being not, I mean, it was literally trial and error, like finding the right people to work for me. I would hire maybe someone that didn't work out, and a week later, the person that I would meet on the street or in the post office turns out to be the person that I needed. But it just fell into place. And the financing was another piece. And how do I finance this growing company? And in those days, it was convenience checks on credit card offers. And I had like 8 credit cards, and I was just rotating the convenience checks to pay off what was due on each of the other ones. And I did that for years just to stay ahead. And scary moments at times when I had $3,000 in my personal checking account and I was in debt $80,000 and trying to figure out how I was going to pay for inventory that was due in 3 days. So those are the kinds of like craziness of a startup, especially back in those days, that somehow I navigated. And Manduka, this company that has survived and is thriving, is the result of that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Was there ever any point during the growth of Manduka that you were like, thought about maybe throwing the towel in?
Uh, oh, maybe just 2 or 3 times a week for 10 years.
Oh, man.
But other than that, here's what kept me in persevering is the people that were becoming this extended family for me. And it was, if we had a job opening, we rarely advertised it because I would just tell the people, hey, do you know anyone out there that might fill in this position? And the next thing you know, I'd have 2 or 3 candidates just from friends of our employees that I could interview. And to me, that was just made life so easy for me. And in all those years that I was running the company, I never fired anyone. I had people quit or move on or graduate from college and leave, but it was a magical time for that company.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. And last question for you. If anyone's looking to, maybe write a book or is feeling inspired by that, do you have like any tips for somebody getting started with that?
Well, this process of writing for me was literally not something that I expected. I had attended a lot of training. Like once I got the contract with Sounds True, I attended some of these online courses of how to write a book. And the consistent thread in a lot of them is try to write at least 60 minutes every day. And I wish I could tell you right now that that's what I did. But I wasn't, my mind isn't set up like that. And I tended to write when I felt inspired to write. And sometimes I would get in the zone and I would just write for 5 hours. And that was, I think, the painful thing that was for my family is I would get into a stream of ideas, and my family would say, "Hey, Dad, it's dinner time," and I'd say, "I'm sorry, I'm going to keep writing, and I might meet you guys." And that was a education for them. You know, they had to learn, and I had to learn to communicate when I couldn't join. And I think it's a dance between those two things. You know, writing when you have that stream of consciousness, and just let the dimension of time get distorted. And the people in your life that care about you will understand. And the people that don't understand the process you're going through, you know, they'll struggle, and it might even affect the relationships. But I think any artist would agree with me that we get into these spaces of creativity where it's our way of giving back to people. You know, like in architecture, I noticed this when I get into a creative space architecturally and create something that gets built that really supports creativity for the occupants who you know, are in this space, either as a workspace or a living space. It's worth it. And writing, I've found now, because of the feedback I'm getting from the book, I think it's also a reflection of the commitment that I made to just download the creativity that was showing up for me as efficiently as I could get. And then, so that's the encouragement, I think, for anyone that's attempting to write, is if you're motivated to write and the creative spark is there, follow it for as long as you can hold it. And when that creative spark isn't there, don't beat yourself up, and get out in nature, break your routine, take a break, and trust that this intuitive capacity that we all have will revisit you, and you will start into another creative stream.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I've loved this conversation, Peter. You've shared so much great stuff here today. If people are interested in learning more about you, maybe checking out your book, where can they go to find all of that?
The book's available on all leading booksellers, Amazon, Sounds True's website, and even my website, which is levityyoga.com. And the book, in terms of what people should expect to find, is this lovely, what I consider a lovely synthesis of my life as a yogi, and then this new science that's evolving with, neuroscience and neurocardiology, and even inspired by these scientific writers like Bruce Lipton or Paul Pearsall, who are, bringing kind of a new awareness to this realm where the physical and the mind meet. And that was an unexpected thing. And I hope the readers that find that, if you're inclined to be scientific, you'll find that the language that I use to convey these concepts and how they merge with this ancient yogic wisdom it's something that is approachable for anyone.
Amazing. I cannot wait to check it out. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. And thank you so much for your time today, Peter.
No, thank you. I appreciate the time.
All right, everyone. I hope that you enjoyed this episode of the podcast with Peter Sterios. Make sure you go grab a copy of his book and check out more about what he's up to. Thanks again to our sponsor, OfferingTree. Head on over to offeringtree.com/MBOM to get an exclusive discount for listeners. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Namaste. Thank you so much for tuning in for this episode of the podcast. To find links, notes, resources, and everything mentioned in today and all episodes of the show, you can head on over to mbomyoga.com. You can find the podcast and myself on Facebook and social media at Mastering the Business of Yoga. And I would love for you to join the private Facebook community, Yoga Business Badass.